Let's see if we can both. Okay. I guess we're both recording, so one of us will get it. Okay. I'd like to now introduce the guest speaker. Kimberly Houston is a pastry chef, business strategist, and alignment coach whose mission is to help culinary professionals thrive without sacrificing their mental health. A graduate of Le Cordon Bleu with master's degrees in both education and transformational leadership, Kimberly bridges the gap between kitchen culture and personal well-being. After years in professional pastry kitchens and entrepreneurship, she faced her own experience with burnout, an awakening that led her to study mind body medicine and develop frameworks for resilience, alignment, and purpose driven leadership. Today, as the founder of Houston Collective, which is comprised of Teach Me How to Bake, Kitchen Fun with Kids, and the Kitchen Table Dreams podcast, she empowers chefs, bakers, and creatives to build careers and lives in honor and that honor both passion and peace. Kimberly's work is grounded in belief that mental health is not a luxury, it's a leadership skill. Her approach helps culinary professionals reframe success, cultivate balance, and lead with authenticity in an industry known for its relentless pace. Okay, so we're going to give Kimberly a chance to speak, and then we'll have some time after for questions and answers. So, Kimberly?
Thank you. First, thank you guys for having me here this afternoon. Well, it's afternoon for me. Might be morning or evening wherever you are in the world. But thank you for inviting me to this space. When I learned about CHOW this summer at the ACF and then again in Vegas at IBIE, I was like, yeah, I need to know more about this. And then I fell in love with jazz. So now we're here. And it kind of is like a whirlwind romance to tell this story. So I am Chef Kimberly Houston. Pre-pandemic, I was Chef Kimmy Who. Post-pandemic, I am Chef Kimberly Houston. We use our name now. But pre-pandemic, I ran a custom boutique bakery for 10 years. I was known as the kid chef, so I also taught children. Several of my students went on to compete on MasterChef Junior, on Food Network, and they all won. So pre-pandemic, I was like the person you brought your kids to in Atlanta for them to be on TV. And that kind of came from when I first started feeling burnout with like doing cakes. Most of my clients here in Atlanta were celebrities. And while we all want celebrity clients and we all want the glitz and glamour, they are a lot of work. They were more work than the brides that I had as a pastry chef. And so then they were like, well, can you teach our kids? And I'm like, of course I can. And so that's just kind of how all of that took off for me. So right before the pandemic, I was working on opening a almost like a destination bakery here in Atlanta called the Cookie Emporium. The business plan and funding were approved on March 13th, 2020. The next day, we went into a 2-week shutdown. And so, all of the work that I had been doing prior to that for probably almost 18 months of finding a location and getting funding and doing all of those things, because I outgrown my home bakery, everything was on pause in 2020. And I was like, okay, well, let's just see what happens. That 2-week shutdown, as we know, turned into 2 years, right? And so the dream of the Cookie Emporium kind of went by the wayside. And I was like, well, let me do this online. I can totally turn this online. I can teach kids online. And so I did that. But the company I was working for pre-pandemic had a non-compete clause for a year, and they sent me a cease and desist to tell me I could not teach children, even in an online capacity, even in an act of God, which is what they considered the pandemic. And one of the things that has I considered to be a flaw, which turned out to be a blessing, is if you tell me I can't do something, I'm gonna figure out how I can. And so the thing was you cannot teach children one-on-one. So I wrote a book. And that book is called Teach Me How to Bake. And I waited until that 1 year clause was up before I released it. and then I released Teach Me How to Bake. And it was very low key. It was very low key. And one of the reasons it was really, really low key is they sent the cease and desist the last week of August of 2020. The day before that, I told my ex-husband this marriage isn't working and I don't want to do this anymore. So to tell him that on the Sunday and then Monday to get a cease and desist, 2 weeks later, I turned 40. And at that point, I really woke up and said, F all of this. I don't want to do it anymore. Let's figure out something new. And so I moved into food photography, just as something fun to do to take my mind off things. Because I'm definitely the kid that was like, you saw the egg in the pot. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions? So I always opt for something educational like that. We have discovered that is like my addiction is I want to learn something new. So food photography became that thing. Thanksgiving morning of 2020, I woke up. It was the first year I was doing the turkey. I was very excited. We were doing something very small, just me and my parents. I was super, super excited for this dinner because I was doing everything. That morning, I was up, I was playing my music, I was like doing all the things. And then by the end of the day, when I went to take the turkey out the oven, I couldn't. And I was like, did it get heavier while it was cooking? Like, what happened? And so I like yelled for my son to come downstairs and help. So he takes it out and he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I overworked too much this week. I had an order for two of the Real Housewives of Atlanta that week and a wedding that weekend on top of doing Thanksgiving dinner. And it's the first one where I'm separated from my husband. So I was like, maybe I'm just really stressed. We'll see what happens. By the end of the night, I could not turn a doorknob. I could not hold a cup. I was struggling to drive home. I couldn't feel my fingers. And I was like, something is wrong, but not to the point of I need to go to the emergency room. We made it through the weekend, barely. Something that like cake orders that would have taken me maybe 45 minutes were taking hours to do. And so I got an appointment to the doctor on Tuesday of the following week. And when I walked in, the nurses were like, explain to us what's going on. I'm like, I can't feel my fingers. And they're like, we need an x-ray of your neck. And I said, I can't feel my fingers. And they're like, we need an x-ray of your neck. And so I was there for 2.5 hours. The nurses took the x-ray. When the doctor came in, I thought she was massaging my shoulders. And she says, do you feel this? And I was like, no. And she was like, you're not in pain. And I said, no. And she said, you should be. And I said, why? And she said, I'm intentionally matching pressure points in your shoulders. You should be in a whole lot of pain right now, and you feel nothing. And she said, you can't feel your fingers because how long have you been ignoring the pain in your body? And I was like, I mean, ma'am, I'm a pastry chef. I'm on my feet 16 hours a day, like forever. And she was like, yeah, so the pain started in your shoulders. And then it moved to your elbows. And then it moved to your wrist. And when I got there, both of my wrists were in braces. She said, and then it went to your fingers. She was like, that's why you can't feel them. And then it sent a signal back to your brain to just shut your entire body down because there's nowhere else for the pain to go. And I sat there and looked at her and I said, so how do we fix it? And she says, close your business effective immediately. You never want someone to tell you to close your business effective immediately. And I said, well, that's not going to work because the Real Housewives need their cookies this weekend. So how are we going to work this out? And she said, I'll give you a pack of steroids for 7 days. And next week you will turn back into a pumpkin. And that's exactly what happened. I took those pills for 7 days. I was great, firing on all cylinders. And then that last day, that next morning, I woke up and we were back to ground zero. So in 2021, I spent 6 months in physical therapy. When I went in for my first session, I could not write my name. I couldn't hold a pencil. It wasn't happening. And it took 6 months before I was able to write my name again. We're only back to 30% strength in my hands, which is why I have this on. And that completely changed my entire life. And when you've built your identity for 10 years around being the kid chef, you're the chef who does everything for the Real Housewives, you're the chef who does all these things for Bravo all the time. What do you do when you can no longer hold anything? What do you do when the thing that you've built your life and your identity around It means nothing now. And the one thing that I realized that kind of fundamentally changed how I look at the culinary industry in general is when my customers were, once they found out I was no longer open, they all asked the same question: Who do you recommend? That changed my view completely on how I look at the industry, because these are people who I had done their engagement parties, their weddings, their baby showers. I'd done their, people in their families' parties, and they all asked the same question: Who do you recommend? It wasn't, when will you be better? How are you feeling? No one asked that. Everybody said, Who do you recommend? And that was the moment I was like, hold on, we need to completely look at how we do this industry, because people don't care. Like when you get hurt, they don't care. They're going to be like, well, I need this cake this weekend. So can you tell me how to get that really quickly since you're no longer available? And that led me down this self-discovery path of like, who am I? What do we do now? How do I help other people not feel the way I feel? Um, and so I joined a master's program for transformational leadership and coaching. And that was the first time I had to deal with feelings. It took me about, I think I was 6 months into the program before they broke me. That's what I call it. Everybody was always crying. And I was like, you people are really sensitive. Like, get it together. And it finally hit when my daughter went nonverbal after a back surgery. We were in the hospital for 18 days instead of 3. And no, we couldn't help. Like there was nothing I could do. And that was in the moment where I was like, my hands don't work. I can't help my kid. My business has failed. I don't know what is my purpose in life? What am I doing? And it was in that moment that the tears started and the floodgates opened. And they were like, tell us what you feel. And I was like, I feel sadness. I feel hurt. And they were like, have you ever felt that before? And I said, I don't think so. And that started a completely new journey for me, which is how I ended up in business coaching and wanting to learn everything I could about business strategy and how do I help more bakery owners understand that, like, you make memories every single day, but people are not going to remember you when it's over. And how do I help you go from this is my passion and I love doing this and I love when people love that I do it, but if something happens to you, have you alienated your entire family? The whole we don't see them during Thanksgiving. I intentionally worked. I didn't want to be around people. And then when I was injured, I was just at home and there was no one to call. And so I've had to do this completely different life over the last couple of years. And my father passed away 2 years ago tomorrow. And that was the catalyst to kind of like burst open my heart of I no longer have to prove I'm worthy. And that was the first time in my life I felt that. And I was like, okay, so now I'm in this world and I don't have a daddy. Who is this girl? Who is this version of Kimberly? And she decided she was going to chase joy. And so for 2 years, I have very intentionally been chasing joy, however that looked. It has led me to multiple stages, multiple opportunities to speak on almost like the rainbow after the storm. Because when you go from, and still my hands don't work, at least once a week, I can't feel them because I was traveling all weekend. I can't feel my fingers right now. Because there was so much go, go, go. So I can't feel them at the moment. They just tingle a little bit. But it's in the knowing, it's in the understanding of your body is talking to you all the time. And are you listening? And I've had to learn how to be still. I've had to learn how to go, okay, my fingers are tingling, or I'm starting to feel a little something in my shoulders, like my posture's not right, type of thing. And how do I move forward in that? Am I in alignment with whatever it is that I'm doing? So people are always like, your output is incredible. I run 2 podcasts and I work part-time at the RBA and I have my own company, but all those things fill me up. All those things that I do bring me joy. There's nothing in my life that I'm doing that does not bring me joy. And I think once you get to the point of going, is this a hell yes for me? If it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And like that has just become my philosophy. And that's why my output is what it is, because everything I do brings me joy. I don't say yes to an opportunity that's a maybe. Like it has to be in my gut, hell yeah, I want to do this and I don't want to do anything else type of thing. But that's not who I was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I took an order because I needed to pay my bills. And now, in going through everything with, does this bring me joy? Does this further the mission of letting other people know, yes, we work in an industry where there's hustle and bustle and go, 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 but are you doing it in alignment? Is it fulfilling you, or are you only here to chase money? I don't chase money, I chase joy, and the money comes. And so that is a completely different mindset than hustle, hustle, hustle. And it's actually one of the words, and I'm like, don't say that word to me. Like, we don't hustle over here. We do everything in alignment and joy. And it sounds very like in the clouds and very, oh, well, that's nice for you to say that. And then I have to remember so often that literally 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago to the day, my hands stopped working and who I was called into question. And then I have to share that story with people to understand I lived the hustle and bustle and it got me nowhere. And once I started literally chasing joy, even if it meant I'm pulling over to the side of the road to get out my car and dance to Beyonce, I'm chasing joy whenever I can. And that's like my dopamine hit. So I love sharing that story with people to understand that we can go, from the worst of the worst to the best of the best. And I think the number one question I get is, how do you stay there? And I think the realistic answer to that is I don't. There are ebbs and flows. I'm very aware of that. Being 45, turned 45 while we were at IBIE. And people were like, what? I'm like, yep, spend my birthday in Vegas. So even on that trip, it wasn't all rainbows and unicorns because I was turning 45. And you kind of have this crisis of belief is who are we now? What are we doing now? And I made like my declaration for my birthday this year was I want people to consider me. And I just kind of put that out to the universe that for once I want to be considered. So the whole no one invites me to anything, people don't ask me to go anywhere anymore. My answer was always no. I've been surprised at the number of people who have asked me to do things this year. And so really understanding who I am, what I need in the moment on those days where, I'm feeling well done. I'll stop and say, what do you need? And I ask myself that in the mirror. So doing some mirror work, what do you need? And sometimes it's I need a nap. Sometimes it's I need some Olive Garden or I need somebody else to cook. Or I need some cuddles from the puppy. Like whatever it is, I give it to myself because no one's coming to save me. And if I can't give myself what I need, how can I expect somebody else to do that for me? So that's just kind of like the intersection of where I live at this point in my life. Um, it is rewarding. I don't want to say it makes everything I went through worth it, but I don't think that there was anything wasted. I think if I had not gone through this, I wouldn't have best-selling children's books. I wrote a curriculum this summer. I don't think that would be happening because if I had still had the bakery or been in the kitchen, when would I have had time to write curriculum? When would I have had time to go back to school and learn these things? So my motto is nothing is wasted, regardless to whether it's good or if it's bad. But if you're chasing joy, literally very, very intentionally chasing joy, you'll end up where you're supposed to be. So that's my story.
That's a beautiful story, Kimberly. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm going to stop the recording now and open up the floor for questions and answers.
Cool.